Revenge with Karen.
Karen had just highlighted bullet point 7 on slide 42 when the knock came, light, hesitant. The kind of knock that says, I don't want to be the one to tell you this, but corporate picked me. She didn't even look up. Come in, she called, eyes still scanning the projected version of the 10Q. The risk disclosures were bloated, which meant Miles had been messing with the numbers again. She made a mental note to ask Jenna in finance, quiet girl, eagle-eyed, allergic to bullshit. The door opened and shut. Footsteps, then silence. She looked up. It was Ryan, new legal hire. Fresh out of NYU, probably still paying off student loans and memorizing the difference between indemnity and impunity. He was holding a tablet. His Adam's apple bobbed like he'd swallowed a golf ball. Ma'am, he said, voice barely above a whisper, you've been terminated. Karen blinked. Terminated? He nodded, throat visibly tightening. She laughed. Ryan, I'm presenting to the board in 20 minutes. Nice try, though. Who put you up to this, Miles? He didn't laugh. Just turned the tablet toward her and tapped the screen. On it was a PDF file. Title, Executive Separation and Buyout Agreement, Karen L. Hale. Signed, dated, time-stamped. 8:07 a.m. She glanced at the wall clock. It was 9:11. Impossible, she murmured. Where did this come from? HR routed it. It's already revoked your badge. No longer on the active roster. The air in the room thickened. She could hear the faint hum of the projector fan, the nervous way Ryan was shifting his weight between both feet like he was preparing to be yelled at or sued. Karen didn't yell. She stared at the screen, then slowly sat back down, folded her hands. That's not my signature. Ryan squinted. It looks like yours. And they said she repeated. Let me guess. Miles and legal? He hesitated, then nodded. She smiled, a small, tight thing. Tell you what, Ryan, walk with me, he blinked. Walk where? To the boardroom. But ma'am, Karen. Karen, I don't think you're allowed, oh honey, she said, rising to her feet. If you think a PDF and a revoked badge are enough to stop me from walking into that room, then you haven't been here long. She picked up her leather portfolio, slid her reading glasses inside, smoothed down her navy blazer like she was brushing off dust from a tombstone. Let's go, she said. I've got a meeting to lead. Ryan followed, still clutching the tablet like it was radioactive. As they walked, Karen's heels clicked against the tile with the confidence of someone who'd built this company when most of the execs were still in braces. And inside, beneath the calm, beneath the practiced poise, something coiled awake. Not fear, not even anger. Recognition. This wasn't a mistake. This was a move, and she'd seen this opening before. Just not from this side of the board. By the way, before we keep going, if this story has you hooked already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and tap like. It tells the team these stories matter. And trust me, what's coming next? You will want to hear how this ends. When they reached the elevator, Ryan swiped his badge. Nothing. Oh, he said, guess they already killed my guest access too. Karen reached into her bag, pulled out a brass key, and opened the stairwell. They climbed in silence. She didn't pant, didn't sweat. Just counted the steps and the floors and the fireproof lies they thought would hold. 5th floor, strategy suite, boardroom straight ahead, voices murmuring inside, laughter, coffee cups clinking. The calm before whatever this was. Karen reached for the door handle. Ryan swallowed hard. Karen, if that really is your signature, she paused, looked back at him. I suppose we'll find out who I am without a badge, and pushed open the door. The door opened mid-laugh. 7 board members, 1 polished glass table, a PowerPoint glowing on the wall with her title still on the first slide, Director of Strategic Operations Karen Hale. Her chair, the one at the end, was still empty. Until it wasn't. Conversations dropped like coins down a sewer. Coffee cups hovered midair. Even the CEO, Miles, former intern who once asked if CapX was a Marvel character, froze mid-sip, the handle of his stupid monogrammed mug trembling like it sensed the storm before the thunder. Karen stepped in like she owned the oxygen. Ryan trailed behind her, clutching that cursed tablet like a priest holding bad news. No one spoke. No one knew what to say. Except Ryan. Poor, doomed, intern jacket Ryan. Excuse me, he said, voice cracking like a middle schooler about to faint during a choir solo. Karen Hale has been removed from the active roster as of 8:07 this morning. Still silence. He tapped the tablet again and turned it toward the group. Zoomed in. Per section 4B of the buyout, her badge has been deactivated. This, he tapped the digital ink, is her signature. Karen stepped forward, peering at the tablet like it was a menu at a restaurant she already knew by heart. Her own name stared back, signed in looping cursive. Date and timestamp matched the file. It looked real. It even felt real, which meant someone had worked damn hard to make it that way. She lifted her eyes slowly. Across from her sat Legal. Sharon Chen, head of compliance, usually unflappable, but now Sharon was suddenly fascinated by the condensation on her water glass. Karen turned her head. Miles. He didn't speak, didn't blink. Knuckles whitened around the mug. He opened his mouth like he was going to make a joke, then closed it again like even he couldn't find one stupid enough to cover this. Finally, he forced a smile. Karen, I think there's been some confusion. Her gaze didn't flinch. Apparently so. You weren't supposed to exist, a twitch in his cheek. Look, he said, placing the mug down. Let's just take this offline. It's probably a clerical. She raised a hand, sharp and deliberate, like a judge calling for silence in a courtroom. I'd like to begin, she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel through wet paper. Calm, deadly calm. Ryan blinked. Ma'am, Karen, you're not on the roster. It says you've already accepted the severance package. Then I suppose I'm doing this pro bono, she replied. Sharon finally looked up, but only to whisper something to the woman beside her. One of the board members coughed. Another leaned forward, eyes flitting between Miles and Karen like they were watching a live-action lawsuit about to unfold. Karen didn't move to sit. She didn't need to. Instead, she placed her portfolio gently on the table, unclipped it, and pulled out a printed copy of the agenda. Slide 1, Quarterly Forecast Deviations presented by Karen Hale. She set it on the table and looked at Miles. I assume we're still interested in truth this quarter, she asked. He opened his mouth and shut it again. His eyes darted toward Legal like a child looking for a parent to bail him out. Sharon's lips tightened but didn't move. She wouldn't touch this with a 10-foot NDA. I'd like to proceed, Karen said again, voice still calm, still deadly. Unless, of course, there's a reason why the man who used to beg me to review his slide decks would prefer I leave. Miles flinched like she'd slapped him. A slow, creeping sense of dread began to ripple through the room. Not for what had happened, most still didn't understand it, but for what hadn't, for what she wasn't saying. For the hurricane she had folded neatly into that leather portfolio like a goddamn napkin. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, is that Karen wasn't there to fight. She was there to bury someone, and the shovel was already in her hand. 3 weeks earlier, Karen had been sitting in that same glass-walled boardroom, sipping lukewarm conference room coffee, and nodding through yet another mind-numbing discussion about Q2 synergies when she noticed the first crack. It wasn't dramatic. No ominous music, no whispered conspiracy behind her back. Just a calendar invite. She didn't get one. It was a budget planning session, standard fare. But the invite went out to everyone on the executive chain. Except her. He only noticed because Jenna from finance leaned over during their one-on-one and asked, You moving your slot to Friday or just skipping it? Karen blinked. What slot? Jenna frowned, the budget sync. Miles said he was reshuffling things. Karen smiled, nodded, played it off. Must have missed the memo. She hadn't. There was no memo, no invite, no reschedule, just silence. That was clue 1. Clue 2 arrived via the clumsiest intern in Langford's short but chaotic digital history. Cody, a junior analyst with a caffeine addiction and a habit of forwarding things before double-checking the recipient field. He meant to send the new departmental org chart to Sharon in legal. Instead, he sent it to K. Hale, not S. Chen. Karen opened the PDF on a Sunday afternoon while organizing her tax receipts. She was halfway through sorting mileage deductions when the file loaded. Her name wasn't there. Not a demotion, not a title change. She was just gone. Her entire position, Director of Strategic Operations, had been absorbed into a vague hybrid department labeled Planning and Efficiency, which, coincidentally, was now being led by Miles' new golden boy, Bryce, a man whose only achievement to date was once using the phrase synergistic disruption without choking on his own ego. Karen didn't panic. She didn't text Miles, didn't rage quit or book a therapy session or call HR with a high-pitched voice. Instead, she brewed a fresh pot of black coffee, sat at her dining room table, opened a legal pad, and started writing names. There was a page for assets, a page for liabilities, a page for allies still in the building, a page for ghosts. It was on that last page she wrote one name in all caps, Trillium Holdings LLC, buried deep in her memory like a forgotten password. The name pulsed like a warning light. Trillium had been her old real estate umbrella from over a decade ago, used to hold commercial investments during the 2008 collapse. She'd never fully shut it down, just paid the minimums, kept it dormant. Most execs had a 401k. Karen had a company skeleton in a closet no one remembered existed. She picked up her phone, scrolled past family, friends, and ex-colleagues until she found the contact. Ellis, Dare Tax and Entity MGMT. A voice picked up before the second ring. Karen, Jesus, thought you died or got married. Neither, I need Trillium reactivated, fully, quietly. A pause, still got the EIN. In the folder marked insurance fraud and other light reading, Karen replied. Erder chuckled, God, I missed you. Karen didn't smile. I'll need a proxy structure and a way to hold Class C shares under the shell. Another pause. You expecting rain? I'm expecting fire, Karen said. I just want to own the hydrant. That night, while most of the office was sharing memes about Bryce's overpriced loafers, Karen was rewriting the end of a story no one knew had started. She reactivated Trillium. She updated the agent of record. She filed the share proxy transfer, silent, legal, and so layered in backdated operating agreements and escrow language that even Sharon would need a week and a Xanax to parse it. And she did it all without raising a single red flag. Because Karen Hale didn't rage. She calculated, and the clock had just started ticking. 2 weeks before the boardroom ambush, Karen sat in her office with the blinds drawn and the company-issued tablet propped against a stack of dusty compliance manuals nobody had touched since the Equifax breach. The stylus glided across the screen, her hand moving just enough to mimic fatigue, indecision, age. She paused mid-signature, then started again, deliberately letting the tail of the K wobble like a nervous twitch. Not messy, just uncertain enough to raise no alarms, yet clear enough to validate in a room full of cowards. She hit save as draft, then again, then once more, because someone would dig into metadata if it came to that, and she needed 3 nearly identical attempts, each one progressively more confident, to sell the narrative of a woman too emotionally broken to finalize her exit on the first go. Her resignation letter, crafted in sterile corporate tongue, was bland enough to be believable. After careful consideration and in the interest of preserving organizational continuity, I am opting to accept the offered buyout terms. It read like HR oatmeal, soft, unmemorable, and engineered to clog the emotional arteries. But that document wasn't sent from her account. She logged into the assistant portal using a password she'd cracked years ago while training her last EA. Poor Lindsay. Sweet kid, bad at IT hygiene, still used her dog's name and birthday for everything. Karen had reset the 2-factor token months ago. Not to spy, just to be prepared. Because someday, someone would try to take her out the same way she'd seen happen to a dozen better men before her. And when that day came, she wasn't going to scramble. She was going to glide. Through Lindsay's login, Karen triggered the internal knowledge transition protocol, HR formality used for retiring execs to hand off projects, contacts, and shadow assets to their successors. It was a boring process. Nobody read it closely, which made it perfect. She assigned most of her major duties to Bryce, the golden retriever in a Gucci belt that Miles had been grooming for months. She even threw in a few strategic red herrings, aiming irrelevant priority clients, and fabricating a nonsense side project called Opal Matrix Assessment. The kind of thing that sounded important enough to distract, but useless enough that no one would ask twice. Then came the real move, her share proxy. Langford Systems had 3 classes of shares. The Class A's were for public trade. The Class B tickets were for internal partners and vesting execs. The Class C tickets, rare, dusty, and quietly forgotten, were issued to early investors and strategic advisors during the company's scrappy infancy. Karen had 5 of them. They'd been sitting idle for years, non-voting, expired, dead in all but name. Except one tiny clause in the 2003 operating agreement, written by a now-defunct law firm and buried in a scanned PDF so pixelated it looked like it had been faxed through a hurricane. Find a triggering event as any involuntary executive separation not resulting from board vote or ethics breach. Which meant, if someone booted her through a backdoor buyout and she hadn't formally relinquished those Class C units, then control reverted. Not to her, but to the original holder of record, Trillium Holdings, LLC. And since Trillium had never sold, never dissolved, and never updated its cap table, the buyer was still alive. Karen submitted the proxy reassignment paperwork through her personal counsel, Dare, who filed it under a routine holding structure tied to real estate investment activities. No one would notice unless they cross-referenced shareholder classes, tax IDs, and operating history. And let's face it, Miles could barely cross-reference his sock drawer. Once the final wire transfer was initiated, from Trillium's dormant account to Langford's capital ledger, Karen sent a single text to Deirdre. The house is bought. They just don't know who moved in. That night, she went home, didn't drink, didn't celebrate, just sat by the window watching rain carve crooked lines down the glass and let her thoughts settle into cold, steady silence. Because this wasn't about revenge. This was about architecture. She wasn't burning the building. She was pulling out the foundation, brick by forged brick, waiting for gravity to do what it always did. Collapse. The boardroom had gone from awkward to radioactive in less than 5 minutes. Miles was sweating through his dress shirt, the kind with a collar so stiff it looked like it came pre-starched from a midlife crisis catalog. He kept glancing toward legal like a man hoping a lifeguard might notice him drowning while clutching an anchor. Sharon, to her credit, didn't move. Not to defend him. Not to save him. Not even to blink. Karen stood with the serenity of a woman watching someone else's dog crap on her enemy's lawn. You can't just, Miles finally blurted, voice pitching too high. You don't have standing. Karen tilted her head. Oh, this is absurd. You don't even work here anymore. She smiled without warmth. Then I assume you've read the full buyout agreement. That shut him up. One of the newer board members, a man whose cufflinks cost more than Karen's car, looked up from the printed packet in front of him. We're all a bit unclear, Miss Hale. Perhaps some context. Karen nodded, of course. Ryan, would you please scroll to section 6.3? Ryan, still standing near the back like he was trying to phase through the wall, fumbled the tablet and nearly dropped it. Yes, ma'am, yes, Karen. He tapped and scrolled. The room watched in brittle silence. Only the projector hummed, casting the agenda's title across the wall like prophecy. Ryan cleared his throat. Section 6.3, Reversion of Strategic Authority and Proxy Voting Rights. He looked up. It says, upon execution of the buyout agreement, all strategic authority and associated board proxy privileges shall revert to the original holder of record for Class C equity units, unless expressly reassigned prior to termination. Karen clasped her hands behind her back, letting the words marinate. Cufflink man narrowed his eyes. And who exactly holds the Class C units? Karen's voice was level. They were originally issued to Trillium Holdings, LLC. The entity was reactivated 3 weeks ago and retains full ownership. Another board member, the youngest by at least 15 years, leaned forward. And you're affiliated with that entity? Karen smiled like a guillotine. Trillium Holdings, LLC. A silence dropped so hard it cracked the air. Even the building seemed to hesitate. Miles finally spoke again, his voice pinched. This is legal gymnastics. This is fraud. Karen raised a brow. Fraud would require deceit. The documents are publicly filed. Share transfer logged with the Delaware Secretary of State. EIN traceable. Proxy authorization notarized and delivered. You can verify every page. Sharon shifted in her seat, pulled a folder from beneath her chair, and began leafing through it like a woman aging in real time. Karen turned toward the rest of the board. When the buyout was executed, you triggered that clause yourselves. My employment status became irrelevant. The company's own structure, written under your predecessors, assigned all voting authority back to the equity holder of those Class C shares. And since no reassignment was made, she continued, Trillium assumed control of my voting proxy, strategic permissions, and she paused for effect, the board's seat itself. Miles looked like someone had just whispered the date of his death. But we had unanimous consent, he sputtered. From people who didn't read what they were consenting to, Karen said, turning toward the projector. Slide 2, please. The next slide bloomed onto the screen. Title, Trigger Clauses, a Review of Oversight in Corporate Governance. In other words, you idiots handed me the keys, thinking I was walking out the door. Cufflink man stared at the screen, then at Karen. You orchestrated this. Karen met his gaze. I defended myself with the tools you gave me. Miles half rose from his chair. You manipulated the system. No, she replied coolly. I understood it. The board shifted. Quiet murmurs. Phones buzzed under the table, texts to assistants, legal teams, PR firms. The beginning of damage control. But it was too late. They hadn't just failed to fire her. They'd accidentally crowned her. And now the woman they tried to erase was standing in their boardroom, legally backed, meticulously prepared, and holding every card they didn't even know they'd dealt. Karen stepped forward slowly and turned over the next page of her portfolio. "Shall we proceed?" she asked. Nobody said no. 8 days before Miles tried to delete her existence with a PDF and a smug shrug, Karen sat alone in her kitchen with a bottle of $12 Malbec and the original incorporation papers for Trillium Holdings spread out across the table like sacred scripture. The file folders were cracked at the spine. Paper clips rusted at the corners. There were coffee rings on half the operating agreements. It all smelled like paper and memory and quiet vengeance. She had kept it all in an old fireproof safe in her garage, tucked behind Christmas decorations and expired warranties. Trillium Holdings LLC had been born in 2007, back when Karen dabbled in commercial real estate investments during the pre-crash boom. It was clean, quiet, structurally sound. She used it to hold property titles and tax-sheltered assets with one or two silent partners. Eventually, those ventures dried up. The market collapsed, partners retired, and the properties were sold. Karen never dissolved the entity. She kept paying the annual fee, kept the mailing address active, renewed the agent of record every year like a ritual, just in case. Because when you've sat through enough reorgs, enough board bloodbaths, enough smiling CFOs with dull knives behind their backs, you start to understand. The way to survive isn't to climb the ladder. It's to build your own and wait for theirs to rot. She ran her fingers along the embossed seal of the original share certificate. The Class C units weren't flashy. They weren't listed anywhere digital. They were issued as a favor. Karen had been instrumental in brokering a partnership back in the company's early days, and Trillium had held equity as a strategic anchor. Everyone forgot about it. Karen didn't. She opened her laptop, accessed her registered agent dashboard, and began the quiet resurrection. First, she filed the reactivation notice with the Delaware Division of Corporations. Standard LLC revival with continuity of structure. No flags, no alerts. Second, she amended the operating agreement to include specific proxy rights tied to any voting authority associated with legacy Class C shares. It was, legally, just clarifying old language. But in practice, it meant Trillium would now vote as her on anything tied to that equity class. She assigned a secondary proxy, Dareder, her estate lawyer, just in case she got hit by a bus or Miles decided to accelerate that outcome. And finally, she filed a UCC financing statement declaring Trillium's interest in non-diluted strategic shares and residual equity control under the Langford Systems Charter. Dry language, deadly implication. The paperwork went out that night. Certified mail, electronic backup, encrypted upload. It was done. Morning, Trillium Holdings LLC was no longer a tax season ghost. It was a legally reconstituted stakeholder with teeth. Karen sipped her coffee the next day while scrolling through Slack messages from colleagues who still thought she was on the chopping block. One even sent her a job opening at a competitor. Just in case things get weird, the message read. Karen typed back, "Appreciate it. I think weird might be putting it mildly." She didn't bother to explain. Let them keep underestimating her. Let them think she was drifting into semi-retirement, planning yoga retreats and gardening blogs. Let Miles practice his victory speech in the mirror while adjusting his cufflinks like he hadn't sold his soul for a corner office. Because as of 10:41 a.m. that morning, when the final proxy registration was confirmed, Trillium Holdings didn't just own her 5 legacy shares, controlled 51% of the voting rights triggered by her exit. The buyout wasn't a removal, it was a reset. And the moment they filed it, thinking they'd shoved her out the door with a gold watch and a pat on the back, they'd handed her the entire damn boardroom. And now, while they scrambled to decode what she'd just done, she was already 2 steps deeper. Because Karen didn't play games. She designed the rules. Karen tapped her remote, and the projector flickered to life again, returning to the title screen that had been patiently waiting. Quarterly Strategic Alignment presented by Karen L. Hale. The cursor blinked on the edge of slide 1 like it, too, was holding its breath. No one moved. Miles shifted in his seat, sweat blooming beneath the arms of his dress shirt like a guilty halo. "This meeting isn't valid," he said, voice brittle. "The current board configuration doesn't." Karen didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You're right," he said evenly. "The current configuration has changed." She reached into her leather portfolio and pulled out a slim manila folder. On its tab, neatly labeled in her unmistakable handwriting, Trillium Voting Authority and Proxy Documents Certified. She slid it down the glossy surface of the table like a card dealer revealing a royal flush. "Sharon," still rooted in her chair like she'd fused with it, reached out slowly and opened it. Eyes scanned the first page, then the second. Her thumb paused at the notary stamp embossed with Derder's seal. She flipped another page and visibly stiffened. The air changed. Not panic anymore, not confusion. Now it was recognition. This was real. She has the shares, Sharon murmured almost to herself. And the clause is valid. Miles leaned forward, voice cracking. You said the clause was dead. Legacy language. Obsolete. I said it hadn't been used, Sharon replied, finally looking him dead in the eye. I didn't say it wasn't enforceable. A slow murmur swept the table like wind moving through dry grass. One of the older directors, Mr. Warren, leaned back in his chair. Silver hair, 5 decades in telecom, and a memory that stretched back to when cloud storage meant a locked drawer. She's within her rights, he said, voice calm. She holds the proxy. Trillium's registration is clean, and the board seat was never revoked formally. Turned to Karen, giving a nod that bordered on reverent. Let's proceed. Miles half rose from his seat. We need time to review this. You had time, Karen cut in, flipping the folder closed with a soft snap. It was called due diligence. You skipped it, because you were too busy assuming the old woman in the corner office would go quietly. She clicked the remote again. Slide 1 appeared, white text on a navy background, minimal, clinical, unmistakable. Agenda, executive succession review. You could hear the collective exhale of suppressed surprise. One of the newer directors leaned forward. Succession? Karen nodded. Given recent events, unilateral terminations, bypassed votes, misuse of authority, I believe the board has sufficient cause to evaluate current executive leadership under the accelerated review provisions of Section 9.2. Miles looked around the room like he couldn't quite believe it. Can't do this. Karen turned to him, head slightly tilted. You've said that 3 times now. I'm still here. You're still sweating. And the board still has quorum. Sharon cleared her throat. She's correct. The clause triggers an automatic review if strategic operations are disrupted due to an unsanctioned executive action. Cufflink man straightened in his chair. And the termination of a board member via unsigned authority would qualify. Sharon didn't look up from the documents. Yes, it would. Miles turned to Warren. You've known me for years, and I've also known Karen, Warren replied. She trained half this table. Hell, you were her intern. Let's not pretend she hasn't kept this place upright for 2 decades. Karen's face didn't change. No smile, no smugness, just precision. She turned toward the wall screen and tapped the remote again. Slide 2 loaded. Risk implications. Strategic oversight failures fit graphs. Charts. Highlighted bullet point labeled unauthorized budget modifications. I'm not here for revenge, Karen said, looking at the room. I'm here because someone needs to make sure the next 6 months don't destroy what the last 22 built. Another board member, arms crossed, nodded slowly. Then we moved to discussion, he said. Karen stepped back, arms folded loosely across her chest. Let the jackals chew on each other now. Her work was already done. And Miles looked like a man just realizing he'd been evicted from a house he tried to bulldoze, without checking the deed. The turn had begun. Miles cracked. It started with a tremor in his voice, a slip in the polished cadence he'd practiced since LinkedIn started selling ambition in PowerPoint form. Then came the stammering. Then the volume. This is sabotage, he snapped, slamming his palm on the table with the flair of a man who'd watched Succession too many times and learned all the wrong lessons. She planned this. This is a hostile power grab. Karen didn't even blink. You signed the buyout, Miles. He froze, hand still pressed to the table like he thought pressing harder might stop time. You tricked us. I didn't trick anyone, she cut in, her voice like dry ice, cold and hissing under the surface. I accepted the terms. You drafted them, insisted legal rush it through. You refused independent counsel. Sharon, still thumbing through the folder, didn't look up. He did. Excuse me? Miles whipped toward her. You told legal to fast-track all terminations, she said, flipping to a printed email chain. Your exact words, I don't want the old guard slowing us down. Clean sweep. No pushback. She slid the paper across the table. You waived review, because I didn't think I was signing over the company to a dam. Say it, Karen said, eyes locked on him. The room stiffened. Miles backed off the edge of the sentence, swallowed it. She turned to the rest of the board. May I proceed with my review? No one objected. Slide 3 appeared on the wall, non-board sanctioned financial authorizations, Q2 to present. Bullet points loaded, one after another. $427,000 reallocated from compliance to strategic talent acquisition, without board approval. $38,000 charged to company card for client engagement dinners held in Scottsdale. No clients present. Prepaid consulting fees to Cascadia Ventures, a shell firm linked to Bryce's cousin. Deferred severance payouts bundled into unrelated budget lines. Karen paused on the last one. Of those savings touted in the last quarterly report were actually backdoor terminations being parked in facilities' OPEX codes. A new director leaned forward, tapping notes into her tablet. How long have these been going on? 3 months, conservatively, Karen said. Possibly 6. It began when Miles took unilateral control of department head budgets and removed dual signature protocols. She clicked again. Next slide. Potential SEC exposure, undisclosed material changes. A faint thunk as someone's pen dropped onto the table. Bryce was listed as Director of Operations in an external investor memo. Karen continued. Despite no formal board appointment, that memo was used to support a pitch for bridge funding, meaning the company materially misrepresented internal leadership during a capital raise. Jesus, someone muttered. Karen looked at Miles. Did you even read the compliance bylaws before you started naming your friends in pitch decks? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Cufflink Man spoke next. Do we have all of this documented? Karen gestured to the flash drive now sitting beside her folder. Chronological, watermarked, and with backup copies uploaded to Offsite Council. The youngest director raised a brow. Do we need a motion? From the far end, Warren spoke without looking up. Already drafting one. Miles suddenly stood. This is absurd. You don't have the authority, you gave it to me, Karen replied, her voice now stripped of pleasantry. The moment you signed that buyout without reading section 6.3. The moment you decided clean sweep meant gutting oversight. The moment you forgot who taught you where the buried wires were. Silence. Again. But not the confused kind this time. This was the kind of silence that settles in a courtroom right before the bailiff calls for order. Sharon leaned back and sighed. We'll need to notify our insurer. Already have, Karen said. They responded within the hour. Another board member looked up. What did they say? Karen clicked to the next slide. At the top, indemnity denial, clause 14, D, breach due diligence failure. The letterhead at the top was from their corporate liability provider. One line highlighted in yellow. Coverage voided due to failure to seek legal counsel prior to contractual authorization of executive offboarding. Miles sank back into his chair like someone had just cut the strings. No more shouting, no more protests. Just a man finally realizing the weight of the axe hovering over his neck. And the hands that once held the rope were all in the room, holding pens, riding him out. Silence that followed the final slide was thicker than cement. No one sipped coffee. No one shifted in their seats. Even the HVAC vents seemed to hum softer, like the entire building had paused to watch the guillotine drop. Warren cleared his throat. I move to call a formal vote on the removal of CEO Miles Jenner, pending full investigation into unauthorized executive actions, financial misrepresentations, and procedural violations. Seconded, said Cufflink Man without looking up from his notes. All in favor? Warren asked, voice calm, almost ritualistic. Hands raised around the table, firm, deliberate, like they were swearing in for war. All opposed? Nothing. Not even Bryce, who sat near the back like a stunned crash test dummy, his mouth slightly open, eyes darting toward Miles like maybe his mentor would suddenly grow wings and fly out the window. Motion carries, Warren said. Miles didn't argue, just sat there, deflated. His cufflinks looked ridiculous now, shiny ornaments dangling off a man stripped of title, authority, and even the illusion of control. One board member quietly slid his phone across the table, showing a message already drafted to internal HR. Begin separation process per board directive. Immediate. Karen didn't smile, didn't gloat. She merely tapped her tablet one final time. The screen behind her faded to black. Then, he turned to the board and said, I will not be accepting the role of CEO. This earned her the first real reaction of the morning. Warren blinked. Excuse me? I never wanted the throne, she said. I wanted the termites out of the walls. Another director asked, then who do you propose? Karen looked across the table and nodded once. Jenna Albright, finance. She's been quietly untangling Miles' budget messes for months. She flagged inconsistencies. Never asked for credit. She never once looked the other way. There were a few raised brows, but no objections. Warren nodded. I'll schedule a closed session for appointment review. Karen picked up her leather portfolio, smoothed the flap, and reached into the side pocket. She withdrew a sealed envelope, thick ivory paper, her name written in fountain pen across the front. She handed it to Sharon. My actual resignation, she said, dated, signed, effective tomorrow. This time, my own signature. Sharon took it with both hands like it was a lit match. Karen didn't wait for applause, didn't wait for protest. She simply nodded once, turned, and walked toward the door. The room exploded behind her, phones dialing, voices rising, assistants summoned, legal asked to stay behind. Bryce asked something about severance caps and was met with stares sharp enough to draw blood. Karen didn't turn back. She walked past the empty reception desk, through the corridor that still bore her name on half the internal routing charts, and pressed the elevator button. As she waited, she pulled her phone from her bag and opened a note. One line sat alone at the top. If they ever come for you, don't fight them head on. Make sure they trip over the rope you already tied around their ankles. The elevator dinged. She stepped in. Doors closed. Down she went, calm, silent, unchanged. They tried to erase her. Instead, she'd rewritten the ending. And when the elevator doors finally opened on the lobby floor, Karen Hale didn't just walk out. She left them in pieces, trying to reassemble a game they thought they'd already won. Thanks for joining the fun, you office survivors. Subscribe for more switch-flicking drama. Let's make your former coworkers sweat.